Hello, this is Heather Hoffman, and I have a simple Christmas card to share with you today with some fun little bits of texture. It's hard to see them in the photos, but they're fun little touches just to bring up some simple stamping to a little bit of a fun new level. I'm using that fun little tree image from the September Kit of the Month from Unity Stamp Company. And quite often I put my image on top and my sentiment underneath. For this, I decided to kind of switch them up and do my image on the bottom and my sentiment on the top. It was a simple little way to kind of break up what I usually do. So I'm going to line everything up in my MISTI, but I'm going to start with only that tree image. I kind of settled it where I wanted it on that panel of white cardstock. And then I made sure it was straight in my MISTI. I like to use the grids of the lid for red rubber stamps just to make sure. Now, before I stamp this, I wanted to add a soft little bit of ink blending on the back. So I'm using some Simon Says Stamp Dusty Sage. It's just a nice pale green. I just wanted to add a soft little kind of aura of color behind the image. I like to use a little bit of just inexpensive printer paper just to clean my brush off a little bit as I ink it up. It just helps soften it and keep from any solid blobs of ink or too much on there. And I'm starting kind of from the center and blending out so it's more concentrated in the middle and softer on the edges. And then I just kind of tested my alignment there to make sure it matched up. And then I'm going to stamp that tree with just a darker shade of green. This is Laurel Green, also a Simon Says Stamp ink. All right, I cleaned off my stamp in between there, and I went ahead and ran my powder tool over that. I'm going to use an embossing pen to add a little touch of gold just to some select spots on this. And I'm actually carefully just using the pen over the bottom of each of the row of branches. That's going to give me kind of a gilded, a bit of a gold touch just to the edge of each spot on there. So the only thing I did learn from this is I might have wanted to wait a little longer for the ink blending to dry or maybe heat set. As you can see there, my embossing powder kind of stuck a lot more to everywhere than I intended. I kind of smacked it really good from the back with my fingernail and just gave it a few flicks to get that extra off, and it probably meant less adhered to the branches than I intended. And there were still a few stray flecks in the background, but in the end I ended up liking that effect anyway, so I think it worked out well in the end. But if you want to make sure not to have that embossing powder stick anywhere you don't want it, I would just advise either heat setting this in between before you add that embossing pen or give it some time to sit out and dry really well. That's dye ink, so it's not an embossing ink, so it won't stay wet for too terribly long. All right, now I'm going to add my sentiment, and by now I've had a little more time for that to dry, aside from the fact I have heat set it now. But I'm going to go ahead and stamp that with my clear embossing ink, and I'm going to emboss that with that same gold embossing powder. It just kind of pulls the two together, having the sentiment in gold as well as the gold touches on the tree. It's a great way just to kind of bring some unity between the sentiment and the image as well. And gold sentiments are so fun, especially for Christmas cards. So it's extra festive, it feels like. All right, I pulled out a Pink Fresh Studio stitched rectangle die, and I went ahead and just die cut that panel. And then I have some memory box 6x6 pattern paper. It's from the Garland Stripes and Dots paper pad, and I'm trimming that down to A2. I almost forgot to trim the other end off, so I pulled it back out to make sure it was 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, just like an A2 card front. Then I'm going to pop that front panel up with foam adhesive just by trimming that down to fill the backing there. I didn't have to fill every bit of it, just enough to hold it all steady, and center it on there. Now I decided to add just one more touch. It felt like the tree needed something to kind of ground it and hold it down. And this is where we're going to add a little bit more texture. I'm masking off around that green part, just using some inexpensive Post-it notes. It's a great way just to protect that paper without having to invest in something super expensive to mask that off. And then I pulled out some Nuvo, some shimmer, sparkly paste that I'm going to go ahead and put on there. And I'm just smearing it around with a palette knife, nothing super fancy, but it's going to add like a sparkly snow on the ground. Like I said, it was really hard to get it to show up in photos because it was white. Maybe if I added a tint of color, you would have been able to see it a bit better, but it's kind of a super fun textured, glittery effect in real life with a little bit of sparkle and shine to add to this card. Thanks so much for coming by today. I hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful day.